back to the show, Business Mastery for Startups, Scaleups, and Early Stage Businesses with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me. And this week we're privileged to have three-time CEO, three-time exit, which is a heck of a run, executive coach Mark Josephson. Now, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but that experience is predominantly in the SaaS realm. Is that correct?
It's all. First of all, Jerry, I'm fired up to be here. You're one of my favorite people I've met in this journey so far. Energy, wisdom, and sports allegiances has got us locked in together. My experience has been in technology startups. So for 30 years, building what started as internet companies back in the 90s, the 1990s. Oh my God, and building them there. The companies have been media, they've been SaaS, they've been marketplace, they've been consumer, and they've been B2B. So it's been a pretty broad set of experiences.
That's exciting. You know, it's interesting because I work predominantly in technology services, though I have done some product as well. And it's interesting how in your career, what you do brings you more of what you do. So marketplace, SaaS, B2B, and B2C, do you have a love or do you love all your children equally?
Well, I have 3 sons and a dog, and I love them equally, but it depends on what day of the week it is and what's happening, when you stack rank them. My love and passion is for entrepreneurs at my core. I was born and raised into a family of entrepreneurs and was always raised with the expectation that I would be an entrepreneur. So the most joy I get is from really like problem solving and problem solving with somebody. That to me is my joy. So I think in my experience, B2B SaaS, I really understand and appreciate the math there. So the problems are fun to work on. And if you asked high school Mark or college Mark if I would be talking about math and problem solving, they'd think we were talking about somebody else. But it's really the underlying problem that we're trying to solve that I love to work on.
If you would have told any of my high school principals or teachers that I would develop a love of lifelong learning, they would have fallen on the ground laughing.
Yeah, so, I wonder. Let's give them more credit than that, right? Like they see people like us come through school, and the feedback I got all the way up until I stopped getting educational feedback was, imagine what could happen if Mark really tried. That was the feedback I got.
I have to tell you this very related story, and probably the last related story in my many tangents, but I grew up in a blue-collar home. My dad was a factory worker, now works in auto body. My mom's a police dispatcher. I started working when I was 9 years old. I was working full-time by the time I graduated high school. And that's the culture I was raised into. You work hard, period, full stop. But my dad, I did the minimum I needed to get through high school. High school for me was girls, beer, and fighting. Those were my interests. If it wasn't one of those 3 things, I wasn't especially interested.
Yeah. In that order, maybe? I don't know.
It varied depending on how any one of them was doing. But I did what I needed to do to graduate high school. I had no challenges whatsoever. But my senior year, something clicked and I took it seriously. And I went from passing to straight A's. And I brought that report card home, and I expect my dad to be thrilled because, needless to say, he never was before. Yeah. And he was enraged. He was angry. He's like, and with a dead straight face, he goes, "I never gave you a very hard time because I thought you were dumb."
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. And, unrealized potential is so upsetting. It's so upsetting. And, that moment for me, it clicked for me. It did not click in high school, nor did it click in college. It was about girls, beer, and beer with girls. Yeah. But was when I had my first job, and I was working in Boston at an agency. And I remember thinking, they're not smarter than I am. I mean, they're really smart people and like good friends 30 years later. And I was like, and they're absolutely not working harder than I can work. So if I'm at least at parity on intellect, I can outwork them. And it was like, boom.
So interestingly, I took a year after high school and basically just drifted. I worked full time and part time, so I had two jobs,
Yep.
which in my house was the minimum acceptable level of labor,
Yes.
and just partied with my friends. But after a year, I noticed my friends were starting to fall into two categories: those that were in college and doing well, and those were starting to get into the kind of trouble that stuck. And so I took an
Mm.
ASVAB, scored in the top 3% in the country, joined the Marines, did signals intelligence, and had the same moment you described. These people I was with, I was like, they're not smarter than me. This is not that difficult. And it took meeting a particular staff sergeant to really turn my mind on and get me dedicated to learning and growing. And I will say, unequivocally, surrounding yourself with the right people is the answer to success in darn near everything. And I think, it just, gosh,
Yeah.
there's an old adage: you're the sum of the five people you associate with the most. And in
Yes.
my life, at least anecdotally, that has been very true.
Yeah. I'm sure you're right, and I agree with that. I wonder how. So I'll tell you what I think about, and you tell me as a fellow entrepreneur, um, your reaction to it. I attribute most of my successes, whatever they are, whether they're small or big, to other people. And sure, I worked hard and drove a lot. Yes, yes, yes. But like, it takes a village. But the shortcomings are all mine, right? And the misses are all mine. And that's on a macro level. The company I didn't sell, the millions I never made, the deal I didn't get, and on the micro level, the meeting that didn't go well, the hire that I made that didn't work out well, the sale that didn't work. Whatever those are, those I think they're out of weight for me. I take too much of the failures, and I think entrepreneurs and leaders do that too often.
So I've got to say, I largely agree with what you said, except for the very end. So
Okay.
I learned many, many, many things in the Marine Corps. Probably the chief among them was you can delegate everything except for responsibility. How things go is up to you. So
Mm-hmm.
surrounding yourself with and or building an incredible team, that's your key to success. But owning the responsibility empowers you to make the corrections. You said everything you said about I love. So if your team is killing it and doing well and you're praising them, that's great. When something goes wrong, if you make the mistake of saying to yourself, you know what, Mark could have done that. Well, if it were me and I was talking to
Yeah.
you, and I would have said to myself, Mark could have done that better if only he'd applied himself more. I've now taken the power of solving that problem away from myself and given it to you. That's a disempowerment for myself as a leader. Whereas if I inverted that and said, had I guided Mark better,
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying the same
no,
thing.
okay,
Like it's all my fault because I haven't set them up for success. I didn't give them clear direction. I didn't tell them what expectations were. I didn't remove blockers. I didn't, it's I'm agreeing with you.
okay, good. I think one of the reasons why an extreme view of taking responsibility has fallen out of favor a little bit is because I think people conflate responsibility with blame. And those
Hmm.
two words are different. When you take responsibility, you're saying to yourself, I have the power to solve this problem. And I'm certain had I exercised myself to my full potential, I would have gotten a better outcome. It doesn't necessarily mean that you did something wrong, that you're at fault for the failure. And it may sound like I'm splitting hairs, but
No.
but I really believe that people are afraid that if they take responsibility, they're taking blame, and with that
Yeah.
comes the fear.
Well, that's about maturity. That's about um, introspection. There are truisms. I've built companies. I now coach executives as they're building companies, and there are facts that are immutable. There is there's facts that are immutable. There is one person in charge,
Yes.
and there has to be. And the buck stops here. When you are the boss, you are accountable, you are responsible for every single thing that happens. It doesn't mean you get the blame, but you're accountable for the results, and you're responsible for putting team on the field with the right plays for the team to be successful.
Yes.
And
And you mentioned coaches and advisors, even though in my
yeah,
opinion, those are different roles, but they
yes,
share commonality in that I believe every successful founder should align themselves with a coach and or advisors. And the reason I believe that is twofold. First of all, I've been a coach and I have always had coaches. So I've seen the value, but I believe that in the midst of the problem, the leader is too often too close to really be able to have the perspective to resolve it. I think of marriage counseling as an example. Otherwise, hyper intelligent people can't resolve their issues, not because they're unintelligent, not because they don't care about their partner, but because the
yeah.
problem is right here and they can't see it. Whereas that marriage counselor could pull that problem away and allow them the perspective and space to come to resolution.
So Jerry, there's one person other than myself that I ascribe anything good that's ever happened in my life, and that would be the great poet from the state of New Jersey, Bruce Springsteen. And Bruce says something about his battle with depression and anxiety and the treatment that he sought, and he said that being depressed and being underwater in that kind of in a tough spot is like standing in front of a brick wall and you can't see anything. But the help you get, whether that's therapy, a coach, or medication, or whatever it is that helps you do that, is taking a few bricks out so you can see there's something on the other side. And that
Yes.
metaphor has always really stuck with me. And I think that as that relates to coaches and advisors, the ability for somebody to provide perspective for you that you might not be seeing. But here's the thing that's I think is special that I strive for is in a context where they have your back
Yes.
hard. And that's where I think as I went from searching for mentors, assuming my boss was my mentor all the time, to getting as a first-time CEO, a CEO coach, and a second-time CEO, a different CEO coach, and a third-time CEO, yet again a different CEO coach because my needs changed, is that the benefit of having somebody to talk to about what you're really thinking about, what you're really excited about, or what you're really worried about, that's not judging you, that provides perspective, and that only has your best interest at heart can be a superpower.
Completely agree. And, that brings up, I think, the critical question, how do you select that person? Before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about sports and talking about changes in team. And I think this is related to that, Mark. How do you make the selection? My coach that is exceptional for me might not align with you and be able to provide the service that you require. How do you make that decision, Mark? What criteria would you recommend?
Yeah, I think it really starts with understanding what your needs and expectations are. Everybody comes to the table with different needs and expectations, and every coach is not the right fit for every executive. But if you know that you want to have somebody who is more of a listener and a therapist and a trainer versus somebody who has been there before as an operator and might have help you see around corners, is a really important distinction to make. I think that's really important. But and if you're thinking about the outcome, I want to be happier. I want to be more balanced. I want to be rich and successful. I want this company to really work. Then coaches and advisors can help you based on what those are. I think there's also the real introspection about what are my strengths and weaknesses as a leader before I pick someone. What are my strengths? And do I want to lean into those with a coach and make them better? Or do I want to backfill or fill in my gaps and things I might not be good at? So, for example, when I was a first-time CEO, I had a wonderful coach, Jerry Colonna, who helped me understand what it meant to be a CEO. And I remember him saying, Mark, every pack has an alpha, and you are now the alpha, and that is different. And that really stuck with me about how I needed to show up, because my needs were smart guy, working hard, pretty successful, but I've never been a CEO before. What does it mean to be a CEO? And I found a coach who helped me understand that. My second time as a CEO, my second coach, a gentleman named Michael Gaines, a brilliant coach who we had sold the business and I was now operating it in the world of private equity. And the expectations of my job and my role and how I had to show up were different. And the company was different. And I didn't know what that meant. I learned the hard way through blood, sweat, and tears, and also with a great coach who helped me, navigate that and teach me some of the things that I needed to learn to make that happen. The third time as a coach, as a CEO, I was building a marketplace business that was Etsy for homemade foods, is what I called it on my pitch. And I went and got the coach who was the CEO of Etsy. And because I was like, dude, like, I just want this to be successful and I want to like learn everything I can learn. So I think in each one of those, you need to have a trusted partner and a relationship with somebody that you can invest in and be authentic with. And I had a coaching call this morning with one of my clients I've been working with for nearly 4 years. And the trust that gets built over time, mutual trust, where I know they can bring real issues. They know they can bring real issues. And boy, do we talk about real things that are going on. And the trust that I've earned to challenge them and to see trends over time. This is a long answer to a quick question, but it's kind of complex to find somebody that you need to understand what you're looking for, what your needs are, and what your expectations are. You need to meet more than one at a time to see if you like them and they like you. And you have to really be willing to commit to an authentic and regular relationship.
There's a lot to unpack there, but there's two parts I want to talk about in specific. The first is your last example with the Etsy CEO. One of the things that I think is difficult for folks who are considering coaching or bringing on an advisor or bringing on a consultant is understanding that those three things aren't the same thing.
Correct.
So in my mind, at least, a coach is someone who teaches you how to ask better questions. They aren't there necessarily to give you answers to those questions, but to get you to see that very often you have the answer. You just have to figure out how to find it. Yes. Whereas a consultant's job is to come in and offer those answers, to give that direction. So for me, and this might be a false dichotomy in my head, I look at those two roles as generally different. And especially in the advisor or consultant rather category, I like to work with people who have achieved what I'm trying to achieve. So if your example of the Etsy CEO, you're building a marketplace that's essentially Etsy for, how the heck could you do better than getting the Etsy CEO? That's about as 10 out of 10 as you could get. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the way I break the world up is a coach, a mentor, and an advisor or consultant. So you are right. A coach, a certified coach who goes through training, it's in many ways professorial and therapeutic. And the core of that is to elicit the answers from your client and teach them that they know the answers to your point. Why do you think your executive team is really unhappy? Why do you think you're missing the sales numbers this quarter? Why do you think that might be happening? Right. And you elicit that. And that's a really powerful way of learning. And I do that. And I love that. And I love being on both sides of that. The mentor and advisor is, hey, did you actually have a one-on-one with your head of sales in the last 6 months? No, geez, I did. Well, better have a fucking one-on-one better have a one-on-one with your head of sales, because no wonder you're not meeting your numbers, because you're not talking, right? Yeah. That's the kind of thing where if you've been there before and done that before, it's more of a mentorship and advisor. I think a consultant, when I think about consultant, it's like they come in and do a lot of work and have a lot of deliverables. In a mentor advisor and a coaching relationship, the deliverables and the work really lives with the exec.
Yes. And let me ask you a question, because clearly we could talk for hours. If you could give one piece of advice to any startup leader, founder, early stage person, what would that advice be, Mark?
I think any startup founder needs to think big
Yes.
and ask yourself, wouldn't it be great if dot dot dot. All too often we fall into the inertia of running a company or building something, which is, I did one today, maybe I can do two tomorrow. We grew 20% this year, so that means we should grow 25% next year. As opposed to sitting back, thinking really big and asking yourself, wouldn't it be great if I could retire by the time I'm 40? Wouldn't it be great if my business was growing at 100% year over year? Wouldn't it be great if I didn't have to worry about managing a sales team because I'm not great at managing a sales? Like, whatever those things are that you want, then you get to build a plan, work backwards and build a plan from that. It can seem really daunting when you're, to your point, everything you're doing is right in front of you, and you become incremental, as opposed to, I mean, you're an entrepreneur. The world is yours. You get to choose the outcome here. So why not think big and ask yourself, wouldn't it be great if?
100%. And at risk of just mindlessly mouthing cliches, the other big advantage of that is if you shoot for the moon and miss, you die of air loss among the stars. It's a horrible ending. No, I'm just kidding.
Right. Yeah.
You
might reach the stars.
Miss, yes, you're still there. So it's 100%. I agree with that. The other part that's critical about that is so much in startup world, startup land, is difficulty and challenge. And if people feel like they're not going after a big dream, they rapidly ask themselves, why am I doing this?
That's right.
This is just a job.
And Jerry, if you ask me the second point, it would be to take that big vision and hopes and dreams and build a plan.
Yes.
Because all too often there is no plan. And when you really dig in with somebody, you realize that you are taking a lot for granted. Oh, well, I think they're going to do what I need them to do. Or I think the marketing team knows who our best customer is. Or I think, my sellers are saying the right thing when they get on the phone with people, as opposed to, we are going to build a plan that's methodical and measured and strategic and thoughtful. And we're going to execute that plan, measure it, learn from it, adjust it, and then do it again. So
yes,
they work together.
I would say that the exercise of making the plan is nearly as valuable as the plan is itself. Just running through that
absolutely process. Absolutely. There's a reason why I grew to look forward to quarterly board meetings. And no offense to all my board members, it wasn't because I got to spend 3 hours in a room with them. It was because it was an opportunity, which I did and do, but it was an opportunity for me and the team to take a look at everything and learn from what we're doing. Everything I asked when I was a CEO, when I got good at it or better at it relatively towards the end, was, what did we do? What happened? And what did we learn from it? Because that's so much of what this is. So the building a plan, which is wrong on day one, right? Like, because you're making thoughts, suggestions, and assumptions, which are wrong on day one, but at least you know how the business moves. And then you can measure it and ask yourself, what's working, what's not, what did we learn here? I totally agree.
I always like Tyson's riff on Clausewitz's saying, everyone has a plan until I punch them in the face. But really the exercise of making that plan, then seeing where it falls apart and revising it, is an exercise in you achieving different levels in your organization as you iterate and grow.
Yeah. So go ahead.
No, you go.
No, I was just going to say there's structures and frameworks that we didn't invent that are there for a reason, because businesses are built on frameworks and structures, and a good coach, a good advisor, a good mentor can help give some of those answers, not the answers to the test, but like, here's the test, right? And let's go fill it in together.
One of the things I always talk to companies I'm advising about is the best way to actually sleep at night is to turn as many variables into constants as you can. We exist in a world of a great amount of chaos. So if there is an area we can turn into a fixed point, it's just one less place to explode. Let's run through that exercise.
Look, facts are our friends, and anxiety is like the flip of excitement, but too often we just focus on the anxiety piece, and it's the fear of the unknown, and it's the fear of what might happen, and it's like bad things that haven't happened yet. And I'm grossly overgeneralizing, but like to your point, well, let's separate the facts from the feelings and get as many facts as we possibly can, and you're going to sleep better at night.
100%. And I don't want to tangent this, so I'm going to mention it and let it go. But that's why communication is so critical. If we're making decisions inside of our executive bubble with our tight group of fellow C-suiters, and we're not effectively communicating that to the rest of the team, then they're filling in what they don't know with their bad thoughts. Every human does that.
Yeah, I'm not going to let it slide because it's such an important thing to say and to touch on. First is the actual communication between execs and leaders. Jerry, this is what success looks like for you in your role.
Yes.
Here's what I need you to do, right? Like at the end of the day, Jerry, if you don't get from point A to point B, I like you. You're my friend. We'll go to Celtics games together. But this is what the company and the business needs. Like that's crucial skill that you have to build. And then to your point, the way the messages and the strategy get communicated through the company is it never happens by accident. It doesn't happen well by accident. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
And that's where, to harken back to 2 minutes ago, there are frameworks. There's a test. I can give you the test. Here's an operating system you can run your business on to make sure that you're aligned with your execs. You have a strategic plan. You're aligned with your execs, and everybody in the company knows what's happening. Like it's so important. And clearly I'm passionate about it because that's the easy stuff. Like you shouldn't be losing sleep over the easy stuff. Yes. Figuring out what to do with something else. Yeah. and yet.
Yeah, exactly. There's a reason why every coach in the history of athletics that takes over a new team starts with foundational things to see where things lie. And I'll tell you, right. I teach a very basic leadership framework I call the EFG leadership framework: engage, fulfill, and grow. In my lived experience growing companies, if a person feels heard and valued, if they like what they're doing, what the company is doing, and they're growing in their skills, they are not likely to leave because they're incentivized to stay.
Yes.
So that engage is communication. And one of the things I tell leaders is that if you feel like you're over communicating, then in the majority of times you're nearly halfway to where you should be.
That's exactly right. Look, I think a CEO's job, particularly in venture-backed companies, and I'm cribbing this from Fred Wilson, is to set the strategy for what we're trying to do, recruit, retain, and engage your talent to do that. And 3, make sure you don't run out of money. Like,
yes,
that's it, right? While you're executing those 2 things. So I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and circling all the way back to the beginning when you made a comment along the lines of, as the CEO, it's your job to set the line and to be ultimate, alpha in the pack. That still doesn't mean that you don't communicate. You need to communicate effectively. And you also need to build a culture where your executives understand that they absolutely can and need to push back if they don't agree. But once the decision is made, we all row in the same direction.
Yeah, I think, if you take me at my explicit word of alpha, that sort of has a tone maybe that is different over time and in different contexts. It just means somebody's in charge, right? And and that every decision has one owner. And I feel really strongly about this. And to your point, I'm a believer in one of the things I coach on is input, not consensus.
Yes.
Every decision has one owner, and that person is accountable and responsible for getting the input from everybody who can make it better or might be impacted by it, and then is responsible for the outcome. Is responsible for getting the input and accountable for the outcomes that they deliver. And getting to consensus kills. It leads to bad ideas. It leads to B or C or maybe at best a B- in my experience. The best ideas and the best decisions are when somebody's empowered, they get input, you trust them, you support them, you celebrate them, and you let them drive hard.
Yes, I think the Soviet Union taught us how effective bureaucracy is at innovation. So, no, I
Slightly out of my experience and skill set, but I'll take your word for it.
Yes. Well, I did SIG in the Marines prior to the fall of the Soviet Union, and they were my target. So I learned a lot about them. Yes. So, but really, all I'm saying is bureaucracy doesn't breed innovation. It breeds mediocrity because people want to be liked by their peers. Whereas you have one leader that owns a decision and then several people that are empowered to share information, that owner, they're able to innovate. It just works better.
And by the way, really meaningful relationships, fulfilling meaningful relationships grounded in trust and understanding and empathy can have hard moments and decisions where you disagree. And in fact, I'm pretty darn sure, I was going to say the research shows, but I don't have the research, that like the best relationships do go through challenging times because you build muscle around those sort of things. So I think, what I want to make sure I'm not signaling or communicating that you have to be a badass or a hard ass as a leader. It's like the opposite, really. It's being understanding of what people need and what the business needs at any given time.
Yeah, 100%. Yes. And that needs to be repeated more often. I couldn't agree with that more. But listen, we've covered a great deal of ground, and clearly we're two gentlemen that can speak for many hours. But I feel like it's a place to stop. And I'd love to have you on the show again. But before we wrap up, Mark, if people want to learn more about you, get in touch with you, how can they do that?
The best again, this is so fun, and I knew we would have a fun time talking today. The best way for people to find me is on LinkedIn, and that's got links to all the different things that I'm doing and ways I can be helpful. But find me on LinkedIn, Mark Josephson, and I'm be delighted to talk to people.
Outstanding. And listeners and viewers of the show, as always, Mark's LinkedIn profile will be in the show notes, so you can just check there. While you're there, please leave us a review if you're on Apple or Spotify. If you're on YouTube, please like and comment. It really helps us to grow the show. I'd also like to invite you to go to destinationemployer.co and download our company assessment to make sure that you're building something that's truly world-class. Mark, thanks again for being on. I legitimately would love to have you on again.
Can't wait, Jerry. Have a great day. Thanks for having me.
Outstanding. You as well, my friend.